To me, it was quite interesting to see that it's probably for the first time that the conversation about natural resources was so heavily focused on tax and how countries can use and reform the tax policy and tax administration to increase domestic revenue that they will have to mobilize to meet development goals. What was also quite interesting is that it was a holistic discussion. It was not just talking about capacity building or policy administration. I mean, all the participants underlined the need for a more holistic approach to this issue, which is certainly very much in tune with how we see the need for reform in Africa. We do have a variety of ways how the governments respond, but if we look at the averages, on average, one of the key indicators of tax to GDP is higher in Africa compared to many other regions of the world. And you can actually conclude from that African tax administration, tax policy is reasonably well developed for the emerging markets. What's interesting for us is that can African tax administrations and tax policymakers, can they really see an opportunity to build on the existing platform really world-class tax systems? And we believe it can be done. We've done recently a survey on how various tax administrations in the world use IT systems for interaction with the taxpayers. And what's interesting is that countries that came top of the list are not your G20 countries. These are countries that started from a very low base, but very quickly reached the top of the league by really learning from mistakes made by others. And again, the big challenge for Africa, can they really do this? We believe they can. It's just a question of really using experience of other countries that have done it before. Another point which is interesting in Africa is a desire to build capacity. We heard today many participants talking about a need to build capacity, principally in the areas that we would consider to be cross-border, things like transfer pricing, VAT, and excise. Again, it's fantastic to see policymakers recognizing that this is an integral part of the need for improvement of the overall tax landscape.
For the last 3 years, MEFMI has discussed a wide-ranging issues around how to manage their economies. This particular topic comes in light of the slowdown in the economic growth of sub-Saharan African economies. It is pertinent because most of the sub-Saharan African countries, particularly those which are represented in the MEFMI, are dependent on commodities. They are dependent on minerals. They're also dependent on the recently acquired or recently found gas and oil. So in this particular instance, in this particular forum, it was quite good to realize that most of the ministers, the governors, the permanent secretaries do understand that natural resources are a finite issue. They will run out, and they need to find mechanisms of managing the revenue from those natural resources, and also to maximize that revenue, both in times of economic growth as well as in times of, like at this particular time, where commodity prices have actually shrunk or gone down.
I'm extremely optimistic. I'm actually excited about the prospect of progress that has been made in Africa. I think what comes out very clearly, for example, in this workshop or conference, is the willingness and the forging of the trust amongst various governments. I think the challenges that are being faced by the various sub-Saharan governments are actually not immune. You have similar challenges in South Africa. You have similar challenges in some of the major powerhouses or economic powerhouses in the rest of the continent. In South Africa, for instance, the debate around the mining and the taxation of the extractive have been going on for a long time. The difficulty with this debate is that there's various stakeholders, and you need a balancing system for you to efficiently respond to the challenges. There's the politics of the day, there is the domestic challenges, there is industry or investor concerns that are being raised, some of which relate to the country risk or the relative political stability or instability, if you like, of some of these countries. So all of those challenges come into play, and oftentimes the tax policy framework is seen as a panacea to able to take into account all of those issues and try to solve them, which is not necessarily the case. So it is a very complex issue that arises across the board, and consultation with the relevant stakeholders, taking it a graduating approach, gradual, doing the first things first, and most critical and most very important across sub-Saharan Africa is the transparency of the processes that are being put in place and the development of the policies around the extractive industry.
Despite the IMF downgrading Africa's growth forecast, I believe Africa longer term has a robust economic foundation. 8 out of 10 fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa. We did the Africa Attractiveness Survey with 500 CXOs from around the world. They spoke about Africa being the next beacon of hope for the 21st century. So we believe we look at the glass half full, not half empty. And Africa is at a tipping point right now with robust recommendations and time-bound action making. I believe Africa can really ensure future prosperity and inclusive growth. We have put forward 3 robust recommendations. PETS. P, performance-based policy making, outcome orientation around what are the needs of Africa and real focus on implementation. E, economic diversification, taking examples from around the world where we look at how can investment and returns from extractives really boost economic diversification into non-energy and mineral-rich sectors. And 3 is transparency. How can we ensure investor confidence around corruption and raising awareness of time-bound decision-making? With PET recommendations, we believe Africa has a rosy future.